Well, good afternoon, and what am I doing again out in the shop? I'm working on some 223 and 556 once fired brass. I'm trying to get it all processed so that loading primers will be a lot easier. What we encounter on this type of rifle brass is swaged primers. So sometimes they'll break the pins right off of your decapping tool, and sometimes they won't. You won't really know until you apply too much force and bend your decapping tool all to pieces. Uh, so it pay before you dig into once fired brass for this. I would really recommend having a couple of extra uh, tips for your decapping tool because you're going to break some. Anyway, so what am I doing? I'm using a reformer on the brass, and at that point in the process, now it's been cleaned. Um, I sizing, is usually pretty much consistent with this type of brass, so I don't worry about that too much. I really would like to take the time to chamfer the inside and the outside of the case and clean the primer pocket. But you get impatient and it's like, well, do I really have to do that? No, you don't have to do that because a lot of times you got boat tail bullets that are going to go in there whether you're chamfered or not. So what's the point? Um, and as far as the primer pocket goes, well, cleaning the primer pocket makes pretty looking brass, but it really makes no effect on the functionality of the brass. So I don't really care to do that. Now I hand prime my cartridges. I do that so that I can control it. And and a message just popped up on my phone. So, but anyway, and I do that so that I can control it a little bit more. But if I don't, at least use the reformer on the primer pocket. It's very difficult to do that with these old hands. And as you can tell, I do recycle my gloves a little bit. So what I have is some examples of what we run into with this reforming process. So let me turn you around here and what we've got. I've got, this many left to go. When I'm done, I put it in this bucket for 556. I put it in this bucket for 223. Why do I do that? Because I can load the 556 cartridges a little hotter than the 223, and normally I do. Do I have to do that? No. They're essentially the same cartridge except for the thickness of the case. So the 556 is a little bit more robust. It can handle a heavier charge, a higher chamber pressure. The 223 cannot. So since all my rifles are 556, 223 compatible, I don't really need to worry about it. I choose to worry about it. I choose to keep them separate because I might want a little hotter stuff. So I do have some pictures, some still pictures. I'll talk through those in a minute as we go through those as examples. But anyway, the process is pretty simple. Pick up a cartridge. Take a look at it. This one happens to be a 223 Remington. Put it on the device here. pull the handle, and I've added a tube to make it a little easier to process. Give me a little more leverage on that. And the result is, all the swaging is gone, and the primer pocket is reformed. Now this one happens to be a 5.56 by 45, so we'll put it in there. And what do we got here? Here we have a 223. Anyway, I'll zoom in on some of this stuff. Now, a lot of these are swaged, but they aren't necessarily NATO 5.56 round. And I'll show you the difference, how you can tell if you got a 5.56 that isn't really clearly marked except for the NATO symbol. And that can be a little tricky for old eyes to see as you go through this stuff. So anyway, on to that, and I will talk to you later. This is a very simple process, but you do need a little bit of equipment. You need one of these doodads here. Primer pocket reformer. You can get those from Midway, just about anywhere, really. And a couple of buckets. Now, these were cashews and almonds. So, and you can find those at most stores. So, anyway, having said all this about that, on to the still pictures. All right, I think we're ready to go here. Here we have a 5.56 cartridge. It has some red stuff here. That is waterproofing around the primer. These are great cartridges. However, that waterproofing can cause you some problems when you go to decap it. So I would really recommend when you start working with these types of cartridges that have swaged primers or waterproofing, that you get some extra tips for your decapping tool, because you will break them. And I'll show you more about that as we move through these slides. Here's a 223 Remington cartridge. It's it is what it is. You can see there's a bit of a rim here. Looks like this was also a swaged primer. Swaging takes a couple of forms, where they press the metal around the primer in such a way that it locks that primer in. You could have some trouble getting some of these primers out. This head stamp is for a Federal cartridge. You can see the primer pockets on all of these are dirty. I did not clean them. These cartridges came to me, they were cleaned, but they still had the primer in place. So once I pulled the primer out, of course, whatever's left is what was left after this cartridge was fired. So it's still there. You can clean that out, but it's not necessary. You don't have to clean it. There are a number of tools that you can use to clean primer pockets, but is it necessary? No, it isn't. Don't need to do it. So save yourself some trouble. Don't bother. Here is a 5.56 by 45 cartridge. You can see there it has had a swaged primer in it. These little lands here have been pushed down in such a way to force the metal to grip that primer in place, make it a lot harder to get out. You'll see that in cartridges where they load them pretty heavy. And NATO cartridges, as an example, they load them pretty heavy. So you don't want that primer popping out, especially when it's in your gun. And I have some concerns about that as well. So, this particular head stamp is for a Chinese cartridge. It is a 2.23. The 223 cartridge are not marked in any way that would indicate it's anything other than a 223. So if it isn't marked 5.56 or it doesn't have a NATO marking on it, which I'll show you in a minute, it's a 223. Don't load it as anything else. It's a 223. The difference being that these cartridges evidently, and there are YouTube videos out there that dispute this, that the metal used is thinner on 223s and thicker on 5.56 to handle a greater pressure. I don't know if that's true or not, so I separate them. I load them differently sometimes. Sometimes I don't. You don't have to. If you have a bunch of 5.56 and all you've got is a 223, or you only want to load to 223, do it. There's nothing stopping you. There's no difference in the cartridge other than the thickness of the wall of the metal that makes up a 5.56. So, here's a good example of a NATO cartridge. This symbol indicates it's a NATO cartridge. Typically, NATO cartridges are all 5.56. So, load this one as a 5.56. You can see a bunch of other markings on here. I think I've got another shot of this from a different angle right here. Same kind of thing. This has definitely been swaged. I'd be surprised if I didn't have problems getting the primer out of this particular primer pocket. But I go through with a primer pocket reforming tool and reform all my primer pockets before I even attempt to put a primer back into them. There's also a chamfering tool that you can get. The primer pocket tools will chamfer this edge and make a nice opening so that you can get a new primer in there. So one or the other. Get one or the other. This is a 5.56 by 45, and these particular cartridges gave me a lot of trouble. This head stamp here, I don't know what that is. Tried to look it up. There's no reference to where these came from, but what piqued my curiosity is when I went to put a primer in here and it fell out on a few of them, not just one. It fell out on a few of them. So I really had to crunch down to get that primer to stay in there. So I'm a little reluctant to fire those because I don't need primers bouncing around inside my AR. And that's always bad. You'll gum up your trigger and your mechanisms in there, and you don't need that. So how would I resolve that? I don't know. I might put some Loctite on here and see if that'll keep that primer in there. We'll see what happens. And it'll be the kind of Loctite that isn't totally permanent, but it give enough grip, keep it in there until I'm done firing this thing. Anyway, here's a good example of the swaging that happens on most primers. It's really obvious it's swaged, and it's not completely around, but it's in 3 locations. And after using the primer pocket reformer, this is what it looks like. That metal's been pushed back, and there's a little entry ramp there for your new primer. And that is all of the images that I have for you. So back to the video. Well, anyway, that's what I have for you today. I hope this helps with the processing of your 226 and 55, or 223 and 556 cartridges. Reloading can be a lot of fun. It can also be challenging and a bit dangerous. So I'm sure any advice I can give you might be of some help, I hope. Anyway, I really do strongly recommend that you get extra decapping points or tools for any cartridge that might have a military crimp in it, as those will be very hard to get out. That's the way it is. Anyway, good luck. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.